Welcome everyone to the Sanctuary and Rescue Centre's Coalition's AfA Connect session. My name is Elliot Carr. I'm the lead coordinator of SARCC. Today's session from SARCC is a seemingly insurmountable challenge for many NGOs. That is strategic development. This process has been mentioned to us many times as an undertaking many organizations know will be beneficial, but it seems like a huge task. And when you're on the front lines in a small NGO with a small team, finding the time just to think about undertaking a strategic development process seems like an absolute stretch. Well, today we welcome Jackie Bennett from Wild Pangolin Consulting. Jackie brings a legal background with more than a decade of experience in nonprofit management and program administration to her work to advise, support, and further the missions of animal welfare organizations. She has guided wildlife sanctuaries and rescue centers worldwide to achieve high standards in a range of areas, including policy design and implementation, financial management, and fundraising to achieve long-term organizational sustainability. And today, Jackie will bring her expertise in strategic development and succession planning and break it down into achievable and straightforward steps to make this seemingly insurmountable process surmountable. Welcome, Jackie. I hope you're well. Please share your screen and join us whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Let me find my PowerPoint. All right, do you see that?
That looks perfect and we hear you clearly. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you again, Elliot, and thank you to AfA for Animals Coalition for inviting me to be part of this event. As Elliot mentioned, I have been fortunate to work with animal sanctuaries and rescue centers in Asia and many other parts of the world and guide them to take steps to be stronger organizations. So when I learned that the theme of this event was insurmountable challenges, I was very enthusiastic about it. I said, count me in, because I've always enjoyed helping organizations meet those challenges. And taking those first steps or knowing where to begin can seem like a huge insurmountable challenge, but really you can do it. And today we're not going to be sitting together trying to write a strategic plan. We're not going to do that. But we'll go through some of those first steps and talk about why they're important and how to do them. And we're also going to share with you some worksheets that you can download and use in your own organization to guide your discussions and start making some important decisions. So here's what we'll do today. First, we'll talk about what strategic development actually means and why it's needed. I'm going to go over a few definitions of terms we'll be using. And then we'll talk about a really basic foundation of strategic development, which is thinking about and identifying who your organization's stakeholders are. Then after that, we're going to work through some basic exercises your organization can do to articulate your mission and your vision, to organize a strategic planning process, and to prepare for and respond to the need for succession planning. And while we won't be discussing it in great detail, I'm going to briefly talk about theory of change, which is another exercise that's very useful for an organization to focus on how your activities work towards reaching your long-term goal. And then finally, we're going to return to the importance of strategic development and how these steps strengthen your organization and how they can be used for your marketing, your fundraising, and everyday communications to bring more support to your work. So let's begin with part one. What do I mean by strategic development? Well, at your sanctuary or rescue center, you are working and making decisions every day, and those are important decisions you're making. But strategic development looks beyond the day-to-day and looks at your longer-term goals. How do you reach them, and how you make your organization more sustainable? You may ask questions of yourselves, some tough questions, and ask questions of others about your organization's weaknesses and what threatens your organization. And you can gain a shared understanding about the steps you should be taking. Now, I know some of you may think we don't have time to do this. We seem to be doing okay, so we'll just keep doing what we're doing. And I've had these conversations with organizations before. But let me say one word, just one word, COVID. Strategic development is also about being as best prepared you can be for the unexpected. Whether that is a pandemic that closes your border and cuts off some important revenue sources, or perhaps it's the sudden loss of a key member of your team, like the executive director or a sanctuary director, who maybe was the only person who had cultivated relationships with your donors or other stakeholders, or maybe that was the only person who knew what important pieces of information were. Engaging in strategic development benefits your organization internally. All members of your team, whether they're your senior managers, your caregivers, your facilities staff, they all make your organization's work possible. And strategic development is also about building trust and a shared commitment to your mission. And being able to communicate your organization's goals and vision should be inspiring, because you want others to be able to understand your work and then want to support it. So now that I've sold you on the need to invest some time in strategic development, let's run through a few definitions. And the first one is mission. Quite simply, your mission is your organization's why. What is your purpose? Why do you exist? A mission statement is different. The mission statement is a concise statement expressing your mission. And we sometimes see mission statements that don't give a why. They give a how or a what. They just describe, this is what we do. And those aren't as effective mission statements. And we're going to take a look at some good mission statements in a few minutes. Your vision, what does the world look like when your organization has achieved its mission? In other words, what does success mean for your organization? What will have changed? What will have to have happened so your organization doesn't really need to exist anymore? Your vision statement is a statement expressing your vision. And we're going to look at a few examples of those as well. And we're going to give you a worksheet to use if you want to sit down with your team and take a look at your current mission and vision statements and think about ways that you might want to improve them. I also have listed a code of ethics. Sometimes you see it called code of conduct, statement of values. They're different terms. And we're not going to go into that much detail today about that. But I will note that a statement of organizational values is often included as part of a strategic plan or shared on your website. It kind of goes along with mission and vision statements. Some more definitions. I make a distinction between strategic planning and a strategic plan. Strategic planning is a process. The plan is the document that results from it. And the process is an organizational exercise that determines generally your primary goals for the next 3 to 5 years and the kinds of activities that you are going to undertake to reach those goals. You can make a strategic plan, the actual document, in any number of ways. There's no set formula. It can be done very simply, very fancy, but it can be done lots of ways very effectively. Succession planning is also a process that can lead to a written document, which is the succession plan. But succession planning is another organizational exercise, and this is to plan for what happens when senior leadership roles, key roles in your organization, become vacant. Someone who was a leader becomes unavailable or is no longer there on a short-term basis, long-term, or permanent basis. Maybe expected, maybe unplanned. And then there's the concept of cross-training, which we'll talk about briefly, which goes with succession planning. And those are steps to ensure more than one person can fulfill essential roles of any position. And the final definition we're going to talk about right now is stakeholder. That's the last one on the list. And what do you think of when I say the word stakeholder? You might think of a donor. You might think about a government official. And as we talk about this, I would invite you to consider a very broad definition of stakeholder. It's any individual or entity that has an interest in your organization or is impacted by your organization. So who are your stakeholders? And this is the first exercise that you can do with your team. And I think we have a worksheet for that, Elliot, if that can be shared. Great.
Yep, it's already been chucked in our chat.
Thank
Everything's
you.
automatically set up to go into the chat immediately.
Impressive. Okay. So here they have a worksheet that can guide you through thinking about who your stakeholders are. And, you know, honestly, for a sanctuary or rescue center, when I think of, well, who's benefited, who's most impacted by the organization, the first answer that comes to mind is the animals, right? Your animals need you. That's your purpose. But unfortunately, the animals don't have the kind of voice that can advise you on how to write a mission statement or a strategic plan. And all of your organizations have both internal and external stakeholders that you should consider when you're taking steps in your strategic organizational development. Your internal stakeholders can include your employees, definitely your board of directors or trustees, and maybe your volunteers. You have a lot of potential external stakeholders, not just donors or government agency, but maybe other NGOs that you collaborate with or work with, the surrounding communities where you have your community programs. If you are a member organization, your members. You may have some very regular vendors who are important to your organization. You may have a visitor program, and you would consider those visitors stakeholders as well. The worksheet we gave you has a list. It's not an exhaustive list. And this is the kind of exercise that you can do, bringing together different people on your team. For example, if you have an education officer, if you have a volunteer coordinator, if you have someone who is more dedicated to kind of your marketing, they may have different ideas to add to this list of stakeholders. And so it's a great exercise to do. And in the worksheet on the final sheet, towards the end, there's a place to list some of your key stakeholders and the contact information for them to think about who you would want to invite to help you with the strategic planning process. Hopefully that will be helpful. And that is part one. But before we move on, I did want to list a few resources for those of you who might want to read more about it. You can search online, who is a stakeholder, and get lots of hits. There's lots of things out there, but these are a few articles I thought might be helpful. So two of these talk more about stakeholders, who they are, how to steward them, why do they matter, who are they to your organization. There's also a resource here on code of ethics, because again, we're not going to in depth on that, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of how you could write one for your organization. And Elliot, is there anything you wanted to add before we move on to getting into the heart of this?
I was going to say, all those links have now been added to the chat. And again, all these resources will be available after this session today. But I think one of the really great points you made before was, in defining your vision, what does the world look like after you've done your interventions? And I think that really links back to one of our last sessions where Richard was talking from IAR, where he was talking about, we kept seeing lorises come into our rescue center, but we don't want that. We want to stop the trade. And I think that's where a lot of organizations get stuck and putting out those fires on the front line. And I think what you're describing, Jay, like having a strategic development, clear mission, clear vision for what you actually exist for is really important. And it's something that maybe people don't think through really clearly. So it's fantastic that we just had a great example from Richard, which seems like they did a really great theory of change and strategic development in a way to, stop the loris trade.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It might not help you from putting out fires. You might still have to do them, but you do have
Of course.
you do have that long-term vision in mind of what you really want to
Absolutely.
accomplish and what success means.
So you can eventually stop extinguishing those fires and sit back a bit.
Exactly.
Okay. Thanks, Jackie.
All right. So we're going to move on to part two now. And we're going to talk about mission and vision first. And recall when we looked at the definitions, we distinguished between a mission and a mission statement. Your organization exists and its mission really doesn't change over time, but mission statements can be revised and updated as often as needed. You may want to make them clearer. You may want to make them more noticeable, a little punchier for marketing purposes. You may want them to reflect a new and different approach you're taking to fulfilling your mission. And there's lots of resources you can find online that tell you what makes a good mission statement. Here are the top 25 mission statements of the year, etc. And there's room to debate what makes a good and bad mission statement, but some things are pretty consistent. And I've put this chart up here. It's from a resource from Nonprofit Hub, and I have the link down there. And let's go through this very quickly. What is a good mission statement? One thing that's important is that it is language that everyone understands. There can be a tendency, especially organizations that take a more scientific approach to their work, to use technical terms or what might be considered insider language or jargon that not everyone is going to understand. And so you might want to look at your mission statement and say, would everyone get this? Is it something that is not including people who are not in our field? You want to make sure, as we discussed, that a mission statement expresses a why as opposed to a how or a what. You do want it to be concise. This suggests that a good statement is one sentence, and I don't necessarily agree with that because we do see organizations that have very powerful kind of multi-pronged mission statements that are still concise and still very good. Say your mission statement out loud. That's one good test to see how good it is. If you say, oh, that doesn't sound good, or it's so long that it sounds kind of garbled, it's probably a good time to re-examine and think about changing your mission statement. You want it to be memorable. You want it to evoke an emotional response. You want it to be specific. You want it to be actionable. So let's take a look at the mission statements for some organizations we know. And the first one is AfA for Animals Coalition. And here is a very good, clear, multi-pronged mission statement that states the AfA for Animal Coalition why we exist. Why do we exist? To have a network of animal protection organizations to improve the lives of animals, to encourage collaboration. That is our mission. Very clear. More than one sentence, but still concise. We can see a couple of very short, concise mission statements, one from Free the Bears to protect, preserve, and enrich the lives of bears, and Acres to create a caring and socially responsible society where animals are seen as sentient beings. Again, they express an organization's why. They help to evoke an image of what that means. It creates an emotional response, and it's very clear and written in clear language. There's lots of good mission statements out there. Now, vision statements, the same way. The vision statements can change over time. Your vision is your long-term goal, your success, but how you communicate that, how you write it, may change a little bit. Vision statements are valuable. They act like a guidepost to direct your overall strategy, direct your theory of change, and they let those around you understand what you consider to be success. And it helps them to better understand the impact they can make if they choose to join you and support you. I have often read that a good vision statement should be audacious. It should be something that seems, almost out of reach, almost impossible, but you think you can reach it and you're going to go for it and you want your supporters to come along with you. And a good vision statement might inspire them to do that. So again, let's look at a couple of examples. And we have Animals Asia, a very short vision statement, very concise, ending cruelty and restoring respect. Powerful, short, clear. World Animal Protection, a world where animals live free from cruelty and suffering. International Animal Rescue, a world where humans and animals coexist in sustainable ecosystems. really clear what success looks like, what that future world looks like, where their work would no longer be needed, where they've done it. And those are some examples, just a couple of examples of some really strong, concise vision statements. So we have another worksheet. Is that also in chat?
Right there, just appeared.
Okay, thank you, Elliot. Taking a look at your mission vision statements. When did you last review your mission vision statement, or when was it written? Do they make sense? Can you understand them? Do they inspire you? And what do your stakeholders think? Now, we put together a worksheet. That's something that you can use internally with your team to really walk through your mission and vision statements and think about how to change them. It would start by, let's say, there we go. Simply writing down your statement and thinking about it. Is there jargon here? Does it sound cold and logical, or does it sound emotional? Does it communicate your why? Is it specific enough? Gather your thoughts as a group. Space where you can put down the mission or vision statements of 10 other organizations you think are similar to yours, others that you admire, that you think are good organizations you collaborate with. Take a look at them. What do you like or dislike about them? Which ones make an emotional impact? Which ones do you think are memorable? What would you take from those to make your own mission and vision statement stronger? And then how would you rewrite them? You can revise them. You can do a couple of versions. You can pass them around your organization and come to a decision. But you should also involve your external stakeholders, because we've already gone through who are your key stakeholders. You have a worksheet on that. And you had that section of which external stakeholders would you want to call on to give you some input. And this might be a time that you would want to do that. After you've gone through your own internal review of mission and vision statements, and you have a couple of proposed candidates for new versions of those statements, you might want to ask some of your stakeholders. And as I wrote here, you can send it an email. You can give them a call. If you want to make it something where people can respond anonymously, which might make them feel more likely to give an honest response, you can easily set up a short survey in Google Forms or SurveyMonkey. These things are simple, they are free, and they allow people to respond anonymously. And your final mission and vision statements should be reviewed and approved and formally adopted by directors. Okay, so now we're going to turn to strategic planning, which is a big topic. And as I said, we're not going to write a strategic plan, but we're going to talk about the process that leads to writing a strategic plan and where do you begin. You will often see written that a good vision statement is the starting point for a strategic plan. So that's good news for us. We've already talked about how you can go about writing your best vision statement. That'll get you ready for strategic planning. Now, going through the process and having a strategic plan that you can share is of benefit in lots of ways. It shows that you understand your mission and how you want to fulfill that mission. It shows that you have the foresight to understand the steps that you need to take to be sustainable and to continue your day-to-day work. It better prepares you to adapt to any change that may come your way, like COVID. And it communicates to stakeholders that you have a set of priorities for the next 3 to 5 years, and you understand those priorities and why you chose those. And here's a few insights from my experience of what to do and not to do. A strategic plan is a result of the process, and that should not involve one person. And we've already gone over that, the importance of including stakeholders. It shouldn't be written by one person. You want a strategic plan To be the result of a number of stakeholder voices and viewpoints about your organization's strengths and needs and challenges. A strategic plan is considered a governance document. So ultimately, that means it should be something reviewed, approved, and adopted by your board as a minimum of their involvement in it. Now, it is possible to engage in a strategic planning process without having to hire an outside third party as a consultant or facilitator, but it is important to have an organization-wide commitment to engaging in this process because it does take time. And also an internal strategic planning committee should be formed, a core group of people who are going to organize these things, keep track of who's been contacted as far as external stakeholders, gather responses, summarize information, etc. Next point, sometimes organizations think that the longer a strategic plan is, the more pages it has, the more impressive it is. And I can tell you that is not the case. I have been given strategic plans to read that are 50 pages, 60 pages, more pages. And it's a lot. And I have read them all, but really there is a point of diminishing returns where the longer it is, the less concise, the more difficult it is to understand what you're really saying. A good strategic plan in total can be done in say 15 pages. Maybe have a few attachments or an appendix, depending what your goals are, what you want to describe, how you want to lay it out. But this doesn't need to be a huge document. I have said many times to people, please don't finish your strategic plan, stick it in a drawer, file it away. Plans that are the result of a good process should be put to good use. I know one sanctuary director I remember told me that every board meeting began with a review of their current strategic plan, to remind them of what they need to focus on, and also to consider what progress they've made against their goals and celebrate. So strategic plans are kind of living documents that should be used once you write them. So let's talk about some steps in the process, and one that is part of just about every strategic plan in some form or another is SWOT, an assessment of organization strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we do have another worksheet on this, if that can be fed into the chat.
Already there, already there.
You're awesome, thank you. So we put together this worksheet to really guide you through a couple of different steps and to organize your results and also organize how you're going to reach out to your stakeholders to get their input into this. As this slide lays out, some of the factors you consider in SWOT are internal. Those are the things that might be more in your organization's control, the strengths and the weaknesses. And some are outside your control. Those are the opportunities and threats. And you see some examples of each here. On the worksheet, I have included a much longer list of factors that are more tailored to sanctuaries and rescue centers for you to consider. Depending on your organization, some of the things listed may be your strengths, they may be your weaknesses. And again, this worksheet is designed to be a guide for discussion, and it might trigger ideas about additional factors that aren't on the lists that could be added. So how do you do this SWOT analysis? There's lots of ways, but this is an important step in strategic development where you want to go back to that examination of stakeholders, that list you put together, and decide whose input you would want. So your internal stakeholders are your personnel, your board, maybe your volunteers if you have a volunteer program. And you might ask them how they see the organization. Where do they see the struggles? Where do they see opportunities for growth? I have a couple of questions on here and a few more on the worksheet that you got. One way to do a SWOT exercise is to have a team meeting. A common way to organize the feedback is to use different colored Post-it notes. I know, Elliot, you and I were in a session together in a workshop doing the Post-it note method. For example, you have pink for strengths, yellow for weaknesses, etc. You have people write their thoughts for each and then go put it on a different section of the wall. So you have all of the pink together, you have all of the yellow together. And as you look at what everyone's written, you do start seeing things repeating. You do start seeing themes emerging. So it is a great way to do it, a very visual way to do it. And it can be fun. I remember one sanctuary director telling me she did this with the whole caregiver staff at the sanctuary, and they had a great time doing it. And she still kept all of the Post-its on the wall. They're probably gone now, but she had kept them for a while after it was done. But I do want to add to keep in mind, some people might not want to share their ideas openly, and you do want to have an inclusive process. So it is good to have an anonymous option as well for this feedback, like an anonymous online survey, or even just a box with a slot in it that people can drop notes into. So something to think about there. There's lots of ways to do this, and you might know the best way to do it for your organization. You're also going to want to get feedback from external stakeholders, maybe a longtime donor, maybe a foundation that has supported your work. These people should know your organization really well and have some good opinions of your organization. You may want to ask former volunteers, maybe someone from another NGO that you collaborate with. And this is important because I know sometimes people are sometimes hesitant to ask people outside their organization for their opinions because they simply don't want to hear something that is inconsistent with their own perception of how well they're doing. But we all have blind spots, and getting different perspectives is a good thing. So here on this slide are some questions that you might pose to some of your external stakeholders. And we have some more questions on the worksheet as well. And as I noted, it's the same issue. You can do face-to-face meetings. You can call someone up. You can send an email and ask them for feedback. Or you can prepare a survey that allows for anonymous responses that may get more participation that way. Or you may do a combination of all of those. I said, we're not going to write a strategic plan today, but I do want to give you an idea of what the document typically includes. And this is a typical table of contents. You would write your mission and vision statements. You would write your values. You may want to put together a brief history of your organization, kind of when it was founded, why it was founded, some of your key achievements. You might want to put a section about the summary of your planning process. If you want to say we had a series of X number of meetings over the course of 2 months or whatever. You might want to summarize what was learned from stakeholder engagement and SWOT analysis. And then you put down your goals. And a strategic plan really covers a 3 to 5 year period maximum, because you can't plan for 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future with any certainty. So a strategic plan is looking, for those next 3 to 5 years and what your primary goals are, and then describing the objectives to reach those goals. That you'll then be able to put together action plans of specific activities that different parts of your team are going to be doing to reach those goals. And I will say, once you've gone through this process, the writing itself should not be an insurmountable challenge, because you understand what should be written and what your goals are. Now, I want to spend a little while on another big topic when talking about strategic development and sustainability of your organization, and that is succession planning. Now, this is a concern when key personnel, like your CEO or your sanctuary director, your veterinary director, becomes unavailable, becomes absent for whatever reason. It could be short. I'm not talking about someone who's sick for a day or two, but someone who may be out for a longer period of time, whether it be a few weeks, months to a year, or something permanent that was planned or unplanned for different reasons. And like strategic planning, succession planning is a process that can result in a written plan document. But there are things that you can do as part of your day-to-day work that will make these times of absence or loss easier to handle. The first is whether you have written job descriptions. You have job descriptions for every position in your organization. Now, sometimes I have seen cases where the non-management positions all have job descriptions, but the top positions, and it might especially be the case where you have the founder of the organization as your chief executive, those positions might not have a written description. But every position should have a job description. And I know I've told sanctuaries a number of times, if you have those written job descriptions, you're already pretty far along in being able to create a succession plan. Now, why is that? It's because you've already clearly written what the responsibilities are for those positions, not for that specific person, but for those positions. And you have clearly written what someone else is going to have to be prepared and able to do when the person in that position is no longer there. And that's what leads to the issue of cross-training. That may mean having someone else learn aspects of animal care who doesn't ordinarily do it. It might mean bringing other staff into the role of building relationships with your external stakeholders, if only one person is responsible for doing that. So if you have position descriptions written, you can go through them and you can say it might be more than one person would have to take over a particular position that becomes vacant or where the person is absent for a period of time. And some take one set of responsibilities, someone take another, but someone else should know how to do those things. And along with that is a very important point I make. No one in an organization should be the only person who knows where the key information is, or knows how to access what you need to run your organization. And think about it. What if you couldn't access a contact list for your donors? It's just gone. You don't know where it is. What if you don't know how to log onto your social media accounts or other accounts, your bank account? What if you unknowingly allow some insurance to lapse because you didn't know that it was about to expire and you didn't know where those documents were? Or what if you missed a grant deadline? And we do have our final worksheet here, if that is in the chat.
Of course it is. It's there.
Of course it is. Thank you. And this is what I've shared in one version or another with a lot of sanctuaries to help them. And it is for your director or someone else in your organization to pull together all of this information that, of course, you don't want to share with everyone, but you want to make sure someone else has it. Things like passwords, things like contact information, things like bank account information, vendor contact information, how to get into your PayPal if you're using that, etc. You don't want to lose that if someone leaves. You don't want to lose that information. And there may be more items to add to this list. It's a starting point for you. I remember when Sanctuary Director told me that she completes a list like this at the beginning of every year. And then she meets with her board chairperson, her board president, and hands over that list. So the board president always has it. Doesn't necessarily need to use it. I think she said the board president locks it up in a safe somewhere. But the board president knows where it is if it's needed, so that information isn't lost if something happens to the sanctuary director. And all organizations, large or small, can put together a list like this just in case. So those are some things you can do now to lessen the impact of the absence, especially an unexpected absence of a key person in your organization. But you will also need to address the steps of what to do when someone is gone. And that can be set out in a written succession plan. We're not going to go through the steps of writing one today, but I am going to give you a link to a resource to read further if you want, and I'm happy to send more links if you want. But a good succession plan should address procedures for recruiting a new person or the temporary takeover of duties if there's a temporary absence, and who is going to oversee those activities, who's going to oversee recruitment. And when you're talking about the absence of executive director or CEO position, this should be the board or a committee of your board that handles this recruitment and replacement process. One thing I say, I don't know if I have this written here, but I also say, yeah, I do have it written here. You can attach job descriptions for the position in question. So if you're trying to put together a written succession plan for your sanctuary director, you can attach that job description because you've already got the responsibilities written out. And then the succession plan can address who might be taking over different portions of those responsibilities in the interim, and then how they're going to go about recruiting to replace that position if needed. Like a strategic plan, a succession plan is a document to be ultimately approved and adopted by your board. It is a governance type of document. Excuse me. Theory of change. I mentioned that I was going to very quickly talk about this since it may be a term that you hear at times as part of strategic development. And theory of change is not the same as a strategic plan. It's a different exercise, and it's an exercise that can be done for your organization overall. It could be an exercise that's done for a specific program of your organization. And theory of change is a process of backward mapping. So the starting point is your organization's vision, your long-term goal. And then visually, you're building this tree of different lines that lead backwards from your long-term goal to different intermediate outcomes. And the activities are called interventions that are supposed to lead to those outcomes. It is a great exercise for testing the assumptions that underlie your belief that the activities you're doing are going to lead to the outcomes you want. It asks you, what is the evidence to support those assumptions? And you may find that there is none, and maybe you shouldn't be doing it. So it is a great way to focus your organization, to keep you on mission, and to prevent mission drift. It's a little more, I think it's a little more complicated than strategic planning. It is one where you may more benefit from having a consultant or a facilitator engage in this exercise with your organization. But it is a great way to guide your organization on where your resources should be allocated and which activities are really in furtherance of reaching your long-term goal. Now, I did put a few more resources here if you really want to read more about this. I hope some of you will want to. I find it interesting and fun, but I know it takes some time. But I pulled a few things here. Vision statements, creating compelling vision statements, some examples. I did have the earlier link that I put in the slide about good and bad mission statements. We have a resource on engaging stakeholders in strategic planning, and then one resource on nonprofit succession planning. There are some really good templates out there for succession plan, for creating the short-term plan, the long-term plan, the permanent replacement plan. I'm happy to find some of those links and send them if you want to email me, if you want to take a look at those. And that is the end of part 2. So I didn't know. Let me stop here and see if, Elliot, you want to add anything before I move on.
Thank you very much for that, Jackie. I think especially just doing a brief overview of some of those really big buzz terms that we don't often hear so much or don't really quite understand is really effective for you to lay out there. So thank you. And just to drive the mission home, or the process home is, within the last 18 months, we at AfA have heard of a couple sanctuaries across the region who have closed down. Sadly, I mean, you very nicely put it through that if there is a dramatic change to organization, but we know too where the founder sadly passed away.
Yeah.
Both those sanctuaries had to close down and couldn't operate anymore, which meant hundreds of animals had to be relocated and changed and whatever else, because there was no succession planning. So whilst this may seem like a really arduous task and something that people don't want to dedicate a lot of time to, there are some really clear examples of why seemingly maybe a boring process actually you know people should really think about. So thank you again. This is some really great simple resources that hopefully people can just, you know, dip their toe into to really understand why it's important and even just to get started on it. So thank you. But yeah, we're getting a few questions in. So thank you very much again. And yeah, take away with part 3.
Okay. And I would say it's not a boring process. It's exciting. I'm trying to make it exciting. I think it is.
Sorry to offend you.
You never
I
offend
think it's
me. Don't
exciting
worry.
too.
There you go. There you go. All right. So now let's do our final review of why strategic development is important and how you can use it. And think about what you created. I think it's pretty evident, based on what we looked at, that engaging in these exercises for strategic development can strengthen your organization. It can bring your team together in a common mission. And that's important in itself for creating a good workplace culture, where people feel a sense of collaboration and a sense of purpose. And that helps with retention of your staff as well. And I have said earlier, please don't just file away your strategic plan after it's written, or your succession plan for that matter, because these documents can be used in lots of ways. They can be used for marketing purposes. They can assist you in preparing fundraising documents, supporting a grant request, etc. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. Example 1 from Animals Asia. Yeah, this is something from their website, and I put the source of it here. There's a link there on the slide. This is a great infographic. This is something that you could also create as a single-page fact sheet to share with foundations, to make part of a grant proposal, to put on your table at a conference if you're tabling at a conference. Lots of ways to put this out. It is a very good collection of all of the things we've talked about: vision, mission, values, goals. You know, rather than uploading a longer text-only strategic plan onto the website, this is a very effective way of communicating. You see, laying out the vision, the mission, the values, the goals, they all build on each other to tell a story of the organization, with this wonderful image of the moon bear added to tie it all together. And it's not it's condensing these strategic goals and the mission and the why of the organization in a very effective way. And while on this slide, I do want to mention something about the statement of values, because we didn't really talk about it. When you see a statement of values, there are a lot of things that you typically see. It's things like, you know, we value collaboration, integrity, inclusion, kind of the conduct that everyone is going to engage in that they agree is part of their organization. There are also values about the world, about how you see the world, that are kind of the basis of your why and why you're doing what you're doing. And you can see some of those examples here that Animals Asia did. We are responsible guardians of the animals under our care. I've looked at value statements of some other organizations, and there's some good ones out there. I've written some down. I'll take some more examples. One is the elephant sanctuary. Elephants are intelligent creatures with complex physical and social needs. From Farm Sanctuary, we believe all beings deserve respect and the right to live free from violence and oppression. So these values that you write, they're very specific to your organization. And they really are the expressions of, this is how we work, this is why we work, these are the beliefs that make us do the work we do. And you can see that example with Animals Asia as well. But I'll go on to another example. And this one is from the Longway Wildlife Center in Malawi in Africa. And this is from their annual impact report. And here you see a visual representation of mission and vision that puts those words into context and really can evoke the more emotional response. The font may be light here, but you can read the mission and vision. Vision is a future in which Malawi's wildlife and wild places can thrive. And you see this picture, it looks to be a serval cat in the wild. And so you can, make that connection right there. This is who they're protecting. This is what, the better world they're trying to create for this animal. A great way to do it. And then example 3 is in a newsletter. And again, this is the Elephant Sanctuary in Tennessee in the US. And they have a 2-part mission statement. This is another one with a 2-prong mission statement. The first prong is providing care for captive elephants. And then the second prong is raising awareness. And they have placed their mission statement inside the cover of their newsletter. But it's not simply written, this is our mission. There's a couple of words that really make a difference here. It says, with your support, the Elephant Sanctuary, bullet 1 provides captive elephants with individualized care. Bullet 2 raises public awareness. So it's written in a way that's letting supporters or potential supporters know they are stakeholders. They will help fulfill this mission. They will help make this possible. A couple of words added, but very effective. And I have no idea how much time is left, but this will be the final slide. We've covered a lot here, and I hope you find it helpful to take the worksheets back that we provided as a way to start some conversations in your organization about strategic development and steps that you might be ready to take to start it. So I'm happy to answer questions, but also feel free to email me, and I would be happy to talk with any of your organizations about working with you on strategic development goals, or helping you to put some plans in place. So please reach out to me. I'm here to help.
Thank you so much for that, Jackie. And of course, we just shared your email in the chat, so it's very easy for everyone to quickly click on. I love that last section, your part 3 there, I think really drove home the practical aspects. Like you shared that, having that very clearly stated out is excellent for your funders, your volunteers, for building a really great workplace culture and what you actually exist for, but also for like government partners and things. So you can very easily demonstrate why you exist and why you have value, which is, really important when, getting the money in is a really simple one. Building on from that, we just had a question actually from Ko here. He made a really good question about should your mission and should your mission and vision statements change based on your target audience, or is it something that you should keep clear for and the same for everyone?
You can definitely have different versions of your mission vision statement. You can have, what you might call the official mission and vision statement, and then others that you might use more as like taglines, things to put in different places. So yeah, I've definitely seen that, and that's fine. Again, they should all be expressions of your why, but you might decide to put them in different formats or abbreviate them more for different audiences or for different collateral that you want to put them on.
I really like how you said that. One of my really good friends at home, she always says, whenever you're in a little bit of struggle or something, and I think it applies here, is what is your why? And I think that really summarizes this whole process that we're going through today to clearly define what is your why. So we also, the whole strategic development process, if your founder is really into it and it's like, okay, we absolutely see the value, we're going to go through with this. What techniques or what advice would you give to make sure that everyone is on board and is actually committed to it? Sanctuaries and rescue centers can be really busy places, and some staff, board members, funders, etc. Even your government partners may go, we don't have time for this. What are some techniques that you think would really get people in to sit down and have this discussion, say with a leader or, even involving a consultant or something?
I think you want to make it seem as easy as possible, and as focused as possible. So I think, starting with a plan with, kind of having a timeline in mind of when you're going to want to get different groups of your stakeholders involved is important, because you don't want to say, well, it's going to take 3 months and you're going to have to work on this all 3 months. You don't. Like what we talked about with the SWAT session for caregivers of putting up the Post-it notes. That's one session in one period of time. It's not a 3-month process. So you're gathering different pieces of information over the course and then hopefully summarizing it. But I think, kind of talking about why it's important, what you're going to ask, and assuring that there's only a limited amount of time that they need to put into it, important time to commit to it. But it's not something where you're going to be asking them to give up their lives for a couple of months.
And given that, like that you just talked about the SWOT analysis, you sort of answered it in your presentation, but especially asking what your weaknesses are, that is something that a lot of people may not feel confident to really jump up and talk about, or to offend their organization or their boss or something. How would you encourage a really good workplace culture where maybe slight criticism or talking about the negative aspects of your work that eventually does strengthen your organization? How would you encourage people to really be on board with that also?
Well, I think it's how you phrase it. And, the way we put some of the questions are, where's our greatest opportunities? Where's, if you could do one thing, what are our challenges? So maybe not weaknesses, but what do you see as our challenges? You don't necessarily want to make it something that we're putting someone on the spot. And again, that's why I also encourage having an anonymous option, because some people naturally do not want to speak up and you still want to include their voices. So I think, putting it in a positive way, like, the organization, our challenges, what do you think is something we're facing that we can overcome? And, what would be your hope for how we've overcome that, 3 years in the future or something like that?
Yeah, and I know coming from my experience, because yes, I learned and did that SWOT analysis in the big group session when we met in Jakarta. But then I went back and did it with our staff at the rescue center I was working at the time in Indonesia. And it was actually a really great process and sort of like I wouldn't say quite team bonding, but we managed to set out like one-on-one interviews with everyone to make sure everyone was like, this is something we're committed to, this is something we're really interested in. And even just having these one-on-one discussions, actually, we found out so much that we didn't know. Like at the time, I think everyone sort of thought that being a rescue center and, finances are a little bit tough and whatnot, sometimes. And, we always openly talked about that with people. The amount of information and additional information we found out that is so uh helpful to people's daily lives. Like it's simply as we want to know the big challenges, like, oh, we can't find whatever money or whatever. But even some of the simple stuff is just like keepers were like, I really need a new hose, or this enclosure is really not fit for my animals. How can we improve that? And so I think going through a SWOT analysis, thinking big picture as well is also really a really great way of, building a dialogue with your staff to go, it is okay to actually talk about your challenges. It's really nice that you consider it and you understand the entire situation that we may be in, but it's also fantastic that, you can just go, you can come to us at any time with any of these challenges, which sort of leads me into my next question
Hmm.
that someone's asked is, how often should you review a strategic plan? And, if you go through a big rebranding or a process like that, where your mission and vision may change, how do we restart the process? How often should we be changing our plans? How often should we be, you know, adapting to changing situations that may occur?
Good question. Strategic plans, as I said, they're generally for a 3 to 5 year period.
Mhm.
And then when you're getting to the end of that period, you want to do a new plan. But in that period of time, that 3 to 5 years, things might happen as well. And again, let's say that magic word, COVID, changed
Mhm.
everyone's strategic plans. So when I say a strategic planning as a process is what's important, I do mean that because we all know things can happen that make it impossible to fulfill all of the goals in a strategic plan you've written. But the important thing is that you have a process and you should revisit your strategic plan uh, periodically, often during that 3 to 5 years, again, to look at your progress and maybe decide that some of the goals you've written are not going to be goals. Or if you have your goals set out, this is year 1 goal, year 2, year 3, you might decide, that year 1 goal, we really have to push it to year 3. If you have a good process and you're communicating that, you're not going to be, kind of punished in any way by a funder or anyone for saying, we had to go back and consider it, because again, you're showing your process, you're showing being responsible stewards of your organization. And so strategic plans can be changed. It's not like they're written in stone and then you didn't do it, so you failed. So I would say go back, use your strategic plan all the time,
Yeah, that's
and
fantastic.
continue to do them when that period of time is up. Once you've written a good strategic plan, you might not have to change a lot of it next time around. Your history, your mission, vision. If you update those, you might just be polishing it off and refining goals that you're continuing.
That's really good. You're constantly learning, and as you said, it's not something that just gets chucked in the bottom drawer.
No, it
Adaptive, and
does.
it's
Well, I know it does so many times, and it really shouldn't. I always say it's a living document. You've done
it
it, be
is,
proud
and it
of it,
should be adapted.
refer to it, um, celebrate. If you've set some year one goals, you know, and you've met them, it's an opportunity for your whole team to celebrate.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make to bring everyone on board in that as well. Um, so I've often seen in my, let's not let's word this carefully. I've seen some organizations who've gone through a strategic development process, some that haven't fully committed to it or haven't done something like that. And so then you get mission drift and you're not necessarily focused. Have you, without naming examples, have you also sort of seen that same thing? Like, do you notice the difference between organizations who have done a strategic planning process and taken that time to do it, and maybe some of those who haven't? Maybe they haven't had access to funders, or funders have specifically asked for this, or whether it's been helpful or a hindrance to the accreditation process.
You know, as I said, sometimes organizations will say, we're doing fine, we're doing good, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. But you get into a more reactive environment. You're always reacting to something. Where strategic planning, you get to be a little more proactive. You get to set the stage of what you're going to do and kind of your focus. And you do see a difference with that. There are some organizations that do very well without, really going through strategic planning process. I'd say, it's good fortune. Circumstances are helping them sometimes. But kind of, when you think about strategic and succession planning, things are always going to change. Your leadership is at some point is going to have to change, and these processes that you go through as a team are important just to be ready. So I think strategic planning and from a funding perspective, sophisticated donors and foundations, they may want to see a strategic plan, and it might be what makes a difference in whether they decide to give you that grant or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And as you've pointed out over and over today, this isn't everyone in sanctuaries and rescue centers, and also for many NGOs, are really busy places, but these don't necessarily need to be long, arduous processes. Just really specifically outlining mission, vision. I mean, that graphic by Animals Asia that you shared is really simple and really effective. It's not necessarily, there was probably a lot of work, obviously, that went in behind the scenes, but it also can be something really simple that really unites everyone. So I think that was a fantastic example. I was just going to talk also on, you mentioned something that I hadn't really thought of before, integrating into your work plans is cross training. I think that sounds
Mhm.
like a really effective way to, shore up your organization if catastrophe or something strikes. Do you have any advice on uh, sorry, that reading the question out. Do you have any advice on how to actually fit this in within your organization and within your work plan and your central work? Should it be something that's just ingrained that everyone starts to learn everyone's roles? I'm not saying the director should become a veterinarian, but should someone how do we work that in, or what strategies can we work in to make sure people are covering the roles of other people
Yeah.
or understanding them?
Well, it's really going to depend on the organization and what your staff looks like and how many staff you have. But again, if you start with a job description and you kind of go through it, who can do this? It might be that you parcel it out. that if you have a position with a lot of responsibilities, there's maybe a portion of them, the communication portion that would be done by one person. Other things done by other people. So I think it's really specific. I've sometimes said if you don't have job descriptions, a good starting point, if you ask the employee who doesn't have a job description to write something. Like, tell me about your job. What do you do? What are your responsibilities? How do you see them? And that could be a great starting point. It's good for people to know what other people in the organization are doing. Not everyone can do everyone's job, and it might be done differently. But I think you can work it into sort of the day-to-day staff meetings, sharing information about what you do, having job descriptions be publicly, be available within the organization for everyone to read. They're not, again, they're position descriptions, they're not person descriptions, so there shouldn't be any big secret about them. And that's a starting point to deciding who could step in and do this part for a little while, who could step in and do this, and what would we need to teach them to make sure that they can handle it for a while.
Yeah, it's a really important lesson for, especially like you said, like it's not often, something really catastrophic within your organization, but there can be, times, weeks or months where someone may be ill or sick or have something to
Exactly.
do where they may need to step in. I mean, I know many sanctuary and rescue center directors or managers wear multiple hats within a single organization.
Mm-hmm.
So even just understanding this and seeing where you can divvy up some more of your role to make sure,
Right.
we don't want to overload everyone, but to make sure everyone has a little bit of balance, there's a lot of interconnection between everyone, because as we've seen, there can be some really serious challenges if someone has to step away for a while. A really hairy question, and I mean, this is going to change for every organization. Not too hairy, not too hairy. And it's going to change for every organization, of course, depending on size and capacity and everything. How could you put a time frame on what a strategic process or succession planning should take? We all are talking about time in busy organizations. This isn't a 3-year process. How long do you think people could dedicate time to get something really sufficient out and then sell that to people, to their staff, to funders and stuff? What's a time frame?
It's going to depend. I mean, if you want to do a simple plan and put together some short surveys, make sure you get some external voices. Again, I think figure out the steps, figure out who's going to be doing what steps. It could be something that's done in a matter of a couple of weeks. I mean, it really could. You have to decide who's going to do the outreach to your external stakeholders, who's going to get that information back. You might want to have one person get that information, again, to kind of keep that anonymity, that you don't necessarily want to share some parts of it with everyone. Who's going to write it? Who's going to be the drafter? Can someone write the history part of it? Can someone put together the mission and vision piece? So it's really how you kind of plan the pieces of it and who you can assign to different parts of it, because you want to spread that work out to your core committee of people. If you hire someone, you may have a consultant who would write the first draft of your report for everyone's review. So it really depends how you want to go about doing it. But it's not something that, I know there are some that just seem to go on forever. Because they do it and then they have to stop halfway for something else and they just never get back to it. But if you kind of have that plan put together, the timeline, and try to keep to it, it's something that can be done in a couple of weeks. And again, like for succession planning, as we talked about, if you already have position descriptions, you can get that done pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think the point you made also before about, if you're not relying on one person in an organization to do everything. That's a really simple process in succession planning, is to get basic bank details, all this sort of stuff written in a way that's confidential, but given to very key people and put away safely. Like that's something that could happen in a couple of days if you really dedicate yourself to it, even though you've got many other things. And I mean, from my experience, when I did, the SWOT analysis part of it for this organization that I worked for, It literally, I think I did it in maybe 10 days. I mean, I went really hard. I organized, I stepped out when I was going to have interviews with everyone, but it really only took about 10 days. And the amount of feedback that we got through that was absolutely completely valuable for how the organization operated on a day-to-day basis and really fed into that holistic strategic development and that plan that we're able to go out in the future and then give to funders and everything else. We've just got a couple minutes left before we move back to the main room for closing. Um, how long should this? Oh, no, I just asked that question. Sorry.
That's okay.
Um, well, I lost the question. I'm very sorry. You briefly talked about a statement of values. Now, not to muddy the
Mhm.
waters too much, what is a statement of values and why would you need it on top of everything else?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit earlier when we were looking at that Animals Asia infographic. Statement of values is two things. First, it is the basic things that you might see everyone say, which is, the values that will govern how you work together, your conduct, basically. And typically you see things like collaboration, integrity, inclusion. Um, and these are things that your organization should believe, should live, should share within the organization, should be part of team building. From a marketing perspective, again, you might see these on websites or see them in strategic plans. And then the other parts of the statement of values are kind of the examples I was giving that are more specific to your sanctuary, your core beliefs that drive your mission, that are the foundation. Like elephants are intelligent creatures, or all beings should live free from violence and oppression. Those are very strong statements. They're very strong beliefs. And you can really see why, if you have that mission, if you have the organization, you have to have those beliefs. That's
Mm.
why you're doing it. And
Yeah,
so, again, it is an expression of your why and how your day-to-day work, how you're conducting yourself to further that why.
yeah, I think
Not
that
everyone has kind of an elaborate statement of values. I think if you can take time to go through some, it's a very powerful message. And again, it's something that you can easily use in marketing purposes, creating infographics, put them on social media graphics, with some
absolutely.
very powerful images to go with it. They're great for marketing.
I think that's something I'll say that I think AFA does really well, like that, we are a voice for animals
Mm-hmm.
and we are about inclusivity and I think that's where change is going to come from for us as well. So, and in saying that, I think we'll wrap up there today, Jackie. I really, really appreciate it. Doing an hour and a half on your own is a very big slog, but I really appreciate it. And you breaking down this seemingly insurmountable challenge into something that actually is surmountable. So if anyone has any questions, they can contact Jackie on that email before, or they can contact me. All the resources Jackie shared will be out in a blog in a little while. They'll go into our resource section, and the presentation as well will also be available for people. But again, thank you very, very much, Jackie, and thanks to everyone who attended this session today.
And
We're
thank
going to
you.
head back to the no, sorry. No, thank you. You did all the hard work. I just talk all the time. I do the easy bit. For everyone who's joining us today, we're going to go back to the main room for the closing of AFA Connect for this quarter. So thank you again, Jackie. Thank you, everyone.